Hello, I'm sitting here with Zalrok Chaos, also known as Michael. How are you doing today?
I'm doing as fine as I ever can be.
So I know you've been wanting to talk a while, not only about like your own content and how you engage in media, but also some issues that are important to you. Granted, even though you're not primarily a political channel. But before we get into that, could you give yourself a bit of an introduction, what you do, some of the content you create for those unfamiliar with your work?
Uh, yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Zalrok Chaos, and I primarily create video game content, RPGs, as well as D&D. I do hope to make some Pathfinder stuff, and I'm also working on a custom Pathfinder campaign setting with a lot of Slavic content because even though there's like Witcher and lots of other stuff like that, there's not really a setting in traditional in D&D or Pathfinder that's primarily Slavic setting. So I'm hoping to work on that too. I've also worked on I also work on web novels sometimes as well as like fan fiction. And on occasion, I have also done interviews, just like Connor's doing with me. So if you enjoyed all that, that's the majority of my VODs are in my YouTube channel.
And I'll be putting that in the chat in just a moment. But to start off, I was wondering if you could kind of go into like how you really got started with this kind of work. Because I'll be honest, you stream a lot more than I do, and it's pretty impressive, I'll admit. But I was wondering what kind of motivated you to start making a lot of this content. What are some of the ways that you've approached it and things that are unique to you about your content creation?
Um, well, I kind of the thing is, I like to watch Markiplier, and he's like really cool. And but he's not the only person to have inspired me to become a content creator. Um, Another content creator that I actually got the confidence to stream was someone what was Ishka TV, and he's doing like a redo a brand new stuff with his channel all the time. He has cool RP scenes. He's an RP streamer, but he also does video games and stuff like that. So and he and lots of other people I know helped me out, like doing scenes and stuff, and like my follow and sub cards and everything like that. So I wouldn't have the confidence without Ishka there. So
And I'll admit I've also like struggled with the confidence in streaming and things like that. Granted, it's a bit of a different market between you and me because a lot of your content deals with gaming and things like that. But it's still difficult. For me, it's like I always I as much as I am very firm in my political beliefs and I stand by them. Sometimes I always I do find the confrontation and some of the swarming a bit frustrating. Do you see a lot of that in your own experience with online gaming culture, or do you think that's something that's unique to when you discuss politics?
um, I don't. Not a lot of people come to my channel to cause conflict. I at least try to be friendly. The whole thing, though, is that because I have massive amounts of trauma and stuff, and as well as imposter syndrome and other stuff, it's hard for me to try and be upbeat about everything. Like, I'm an introvert. I have lots of trouble even talking to people. Um, so it's difficult in more of a personal way instead of like interpersonal.
And I will say I don't want to necessarily compare experiences and pretend they're the same, obviously. But I have noticed that in my own work that sometimes the isolation, particularly as it relates to COVID, has sometimes caused a similar reaction in me in feeling like I want to pull back, I want to refrain from engaging with people. But it seems like you've managed to kind of overcome that, at least to a degree, because like I said earlier, you do upload quite a bit. Um, and I was wondering if you're comfortable with talking about that. How have you kind of managed to balance what you just described earlier with your motivation to upload and continue to uh, engage in content creation?
Well, the thing is, I never really felt a lot of like the things people felt with COVID.
Mm.
I'm naturally okay with being by myself and isolated from other people because I like being alone. Going out into the public is causes me social as well as mental anxiety, but being home alone perfectly fine for with me. So as well for the motivation to continue streaming, um, more like as a form of therapy, if you can believe me. It's like it helps me get out of my comfort zone so I can talk to people better, get better. What's the word?
You can
Better
get
experience with interacting with people online or in real life.
so to sort of clarify, from your perspective, it's not so much that your experiences really changed. It was that you already were experiencing this already, and the isolation and the intro. How do I put this? The isolation was something that you were used to. So instead, you just did what you were already doing, and you used this channel as a way to sort of learn how to express yourself and engage with other people. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say, like, oh, go
Also
ahead.
as a way, also as a way to like entertain people during this trying time. It's like if I could at least make one person happy, that's all I really care about. I'm not really trying to do this for money, even though that would be great. But otherwise, as long as someone is happy with whatever I make, I don't really care.
And I think that's a pretty impressive way of approaching this kind of thing, because for me, it's, I will say, sometimes when you're making content creation and you're hoping to make something that is not only a part of your brand or part of who you are, but also trying to make it monetarily, it can be frustrating when things don't always pan through. But from your perspective, this is not just something that is like a brand for you. This is something you do because it's a good thing for you and for the people that listen to you. And I think I will say I really admire that, and I wish more people had that attitude. Um, but to kind of piggyback off of that as well, I was wondering how you've kind of balanced different types of content creation, because for, when I look at your channel, I see a lot of different games and a lot of different streams, but you also have a lot of um, sections where you dedicate specific terms. There's the divinity section, if I'm not mistaken. I apologize for if I'm mistaking it. I am not very awake at the moment, so I apologize. But if you could go into kind of how you came up with the way you've branded your channel and how that you've done that, I would be greatly appreciated.
Well, initially with the Divinity stuff, I was hoping to do like all of the Divinity games, which, and a lot of people don't know, well, there's more than Original Sin 1 and 2, as well as Dragon Commander. There's also all of the older 90s games. So I figured, why not just play them in lore order and go from there? With Dragon Commander, I played that on stream and VODed all of them. And first time I played Original Sin 1, I didn't I didn't have a large audience back then or a lot of people to watch, so I kind of gave up on that for a little bit. Then went to other games and made sections about them. And eventually, after growing a bit more, then I started dedicating my time to Divinity. And currently, I'm co-hosting with another creator known as Celery Live, who is also a good friend of mine. So
Looks like it worked out for you in the end. It's always good to see not only people collabing but also making their own content and building off one another. But oh, go ahead.
I've also done. There's like a tutorial I did for like Roll20, as well as like some interviews I did. Some of them no longer exist. Some of them are still up there. I I just like some, because Zal is like, it rhymes with a lot of words, at least in my head. I just call them interviews, alterviews,
Hmm.
just as like a pun. And then there, oh, I also named the Dragon Commander series the Song of Salt and Fire as like a pun on salt and fire. So, and
Hey, it's clever branding. I mean, I just stuck with the progressive American, so but there's not a lot of puns you can make off of that. So, um, but I was kind of curious to go back to what you brought up earlier about Slavic culture in games, and if I was wondering if you could expand a bit upon like what you were talking about in terms of how a lot of the gaming perspective is not necessarily representative of things. Like Witcher is very Slavic in its origins, but not a lot of games really emphasize that. So I was wondering if you could go in a little more into that.
well, for me, I only very recently started going into like in, into researching Slavic culture, like outside of just Poland itself, which is the majority of the culture Witcher is from, because it was written by a Polish man. And gotta say, outside of Ukraine or Russia, Poland, there's a large swath of culture that a lot of people don't know about. So I just figured, you know what, I should probably expand on the knowledge a lot of people have about Slavic culture, at least the cultures within the whole ethnic sphere of Slavs. So that's why I decided to make a campaign setting about them, as well as like the older polytheistic gods before Christianity came along.
Oh, that's interesting. Have you made plans for future projects to kind of emphasize that, or is that just something that you've done in the past?
Uh, Currently doing this now, and I'm also being helped by a lot of some. A friend of mine, Luciano, writes. Night Queen helped me out. Uh, Night Queen also helped me make religious symbols for the various gods I'm using. Luciano is helping me with other stuff, as well as like he, well, they know what's the word? Uh, all the different Pathfinder domains. So they've been helping me out
In a
with this.
in a way, it's kind of like a form of cultural history because like it might not be like the exact like historical method, but you're still pointing out how culture intersects with modern media and what's not been just represented in that media. If you had to guess, why do you think that like aside from Poland, Ukraine, and Russia, do is a lot of Slavic culture overlooked? Why do you think a lot of people in the Western Hemisphere overlook it? And what do you think can be done to kind of address that through the medium you are obviously trying to influence?
Well, the thing is, I, th- I think the number one answer is because of the Cold War.
I figured, yeah.
Because of the Cold War, the majority of Slavic, especially Russians or like anyone that, or like Serbian or anyone within the Slavic nations, were evil bad guys to face against James Bond or whoever else Western great hero. So I just want to like topple that stereotype because I hate it. We need to have more. We need to have less of that because that annoys me as a Ukrainian, as a Polish person. It's like I'm like, I'm more than just Slavic, but it's like it bothers me that there's such a huge stereotype.
I'm not as well connected to any of the Slavic ancestry that I have, but on my family, on my mom's side, I'm Polish. We were called Svik before it was Yeah, we'll just say Americanized right now because I can't talk today. To Swick, and so what's interesting is like in my experience, part of the reason that my family doesn't, for example, talk about it all that much or know a lot about our Polish ancestry is partially because some Polish Americans uh, just there was a stigma. And I was wondering, have you kind of brought this up in like media terms, but do you think that some of the stigma that immigrant generations sometimes internalize and carry with them influences part of the reason we're seeing uh, an almost an ignorance of Slavic culture?
More than likely, when my great Guido came to Canada, as well as lots of other Ukrainians. Uh, like my great Guido came before the Civil War. Well, the Russian Revolution, yeah. Before the Bolsheviks came around, my fourth generation grandparents and their families came here, and afterwards they were kind of treated like crap by everyone else except for the Cree. Yeah, that's the First Nation tribe, the Cree. Yeah, so
Yeah.
they traded and did some cultural and trade exchanges, and they Ukrainianized some Anglican Anglophone words just to adapt here, and they didn't. I don't think my. I don't think Canada had the same problem as the US with being treated like garbage, but there was a bit of stigma because they didn't learning. At least they knew Ukrainian or other Slavic languages and only used English to get by. I don't know that history all that well. Um, that's knowledge that my parents have, and I'm not on good terms with them, so I can't really answer that question fully.
Yeah, and to like, and I think part of the thing is also like different nations responded to the immigration of Eastern Europeans, particularly Polish and Ukrainians, and in a very different way. For example, a lot of Polish people that came over on my family side were Catholic and are still Catholic to this day. And anyone who's looked at Catholic history in the United States will know that we weren't originally accepted here, and that kind of is interesting to see because how that kind of played into um, internalized bigotry. But another interesting thing, I think you'd find this interesting. One of my family members actually internalized his frustration with being Polish so much that he insisted he was Ukrainian, even though his sisters and everybody else in his family was just like, no, we're Polish. Um, it's one of those things. But to add to that, we brought this up in the private chat before we started streaming, and you mentioned how a lot of times immigrants Anglicanize their names to fit in more, and you mentioned how your last name is kind of an extension of that. Would you like to kind of go into that story and how that kind of plays into your stuff?
Well, not well. Also, the immigration board would just butcher the name and change it to Anglicanized. But yeah, my name is actually I know the meaning of my surname in translated. It means on the hill, which is kind of ironic because when I was growing up, my parents own or still or owned. I don't really remember if they still own it. They have an acreage, and on the house is a hill. So, um, and in proper Ukrainian, the final C is an A, and it's silent. Growing up, a lot of people, especially teachers, would just say my name wrong a lot.
And so, like, did you change it, or did your family end up switching it?
Um, no, I just changed it on my Twitter so people wouldn't say it incorrectly.
And that kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier. I think a lot of there is, I think, an ability to connect with Slavic culture. But on another front, I kind of wanted to get into how your experience and your content creation has kind of been somewhat influenced by politics, even though you're not a big political channel. But on occasion, you have brought it up. And I was wondering, how have you balanced a lot of your gaming focus with some of your political talk? Because I know on Twitter you occasionally talk about it, but you've also made video dealing with the Ukrainian uh, resistance against the Russian invasion.
So I'm a huge left winger. I wouldn't say I'm a liberal. A lot of liberalism annoys me with how pathetically cowardly they are. And I don't mean to say you're a coward. I mean to say that as a whole, a lot of liberalism is pretty cowardly. I don't mean to be mean about this, but in my experience and within my content, in in it, I normally go for. I'm an anti-royalist, so in a lot of content that I make that has royalty, or any kind of noble, it's like, great, someone I can't trust, or because they think they're better than me for the content of their birth or whatever else. That it's like, great, I hate this person intrinsically.
Yeah, no, I get that completely.
Or there's just a lot of being an anti-royalist, being anti-imperialism, unless it's like stomping my foot on some tyrannical asshole or whatever else. Also, yes, I swear a lot because growing up I was suppressed from swearing. So if anyone's offended by that, I'm sorry. I'm just expressing a lot of my frustrations and opinions. So uh, my politics can be summed up as spite against people who think they're better than everyone else.
Mm. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward way to handle things, and it's probably the most ethical thing you'll get instead of, say, just writing down a whole book and then ignoring how other people are treated. Um, but in terms of like how, in your experience with a lot of these video games and online commentary, uh, there seems to be an intersection between politics and gaming that is largely ignored, And I was wondering, sorry, I was wondering if in your experience that has sometimes caused frustration for you when dealing with, say, anti-royal themes of anti-royalism, or even in terms of themes of anti-imperialism.
Um, well, definitely a large portion of like the wider gaming community who are like, oh, this game has politics when they mean anything that is pro feminism or whatever else, but they completely ignore like imperialism or other crap. It drives me nuts. It's like, do you have self awareness? The I could have a huge rant about how a lot of other right wing gamers are a bunch of. That drives me insane. But anyway, about the intersection between imperial, anti-imperialism or royalism within video games, it's like I think that really depends on the game I'm playing. Because some games they actually have sympathetic royal characters, like in Final Fantasy 15, where the main character of that video game, Noctis, he has his parent, his father, the king, murdered, and his kingdom taken over by a rival empire. And for anti-imperialism, I think if the it really depends. Like if there's like in Dragon Commander, like I just mentioned earlier, there's a schism between like you, the main character, who is the an illegitimate son of the late emperor, as well as like a dragon woman, while your more legitimate siblings are causing untold suffering and with their civil war. There's various differences that one can just go like, if it's to bring peace to the nation and stop this war from going on, sure. If there's maybe this evil empire taking over this guy's kingdom is a bad thing, there's nuanced opinions one can have depending on the video game. I think that's important to understand with that.
And I would also kind of there's two things I'd like to add to that, or rather bounce off of that. The first is I think, generally speaking, a lot of the attitude of portraying video games that introduce people who are traditionally ignored in modern media as being inherently political, or being part of an agenda, is nothing new. Especially when it comes to African Americans being presented as centerpieces of the story, along with their white counterparts. Um, I think we even like in outside of video games and movies and TV shows, we see this. I believe it was Sargon of Akkad and Internet Comment Etiquette who got into a bit of a back and forth over Lord of the Rings, because there was an African American woman who was portraying an elf. And it's interesting because on the one hand, all media is political because it has a certain perspective and a set of values that they present. But on the other hand, it seems to me that when it comes to modern media, people seem to associate politics with with like corruption and evil, when politics is nothing more than people interacting with one another to really express their desired values. And I was wondering if you had a similar perspective, or do you think like they're just trying to, or if this is just pure prejudice?
Well, speaking about this, that's actually a very good question because I used to listen to that bastard, Sargon of Cod. atheism is unstoppable and lots of other right-wing atheists until I was like, you know what? If I don't listen to them and just think for myself, I can view them with more impartiality than they give to other people. Because I realized, hey, AIU and other people, the majority of their arguments is just insulting other people for their looks or whatever else. So it's like, and that was like a decade ago, and I'm 30. So
And it does seem like, to at least on the gaming front, there is an unfortunate element of people who want to isolate people from it rather than bringing in new people. And considering your content, would you say that there is also an effort to kind of counteract that and try to help people who don't fit with like a white conformative narrative of and helping them to kind of enjoy the games that are meant to be shared among people?
I do actually enjoy it when other people come in, regardless of their background or whatever else. I'm trying to entertain others. I don't want to disparage them for their ethnicity or whatever else. If they're trans, if they're a person of color or whatever else, I don't care. As long as they are having a good time, as long as I'm having a good time with them, as long as we're having fun and talking about things that interest us, I don't give a damn.
And I feel like that should be the attitude overall. But in the future, do you think that attitude will take off a little more, or do you think figures like Sargon of Akkad and really atheism is unstoppable will continue to kind of, or even like the quartering will continue to influence gaming in a negative light, or perhaps will you win out?
Considering how small both my channels are, maybe not, uh, but I don't know. I think AIU showed himself to be a hypocrite when he once said that he thought everyone who leaves the US because Trump won are a bunch of cowards, and yet he left for Germany when Trump won. So, and Sargon of Akkad managed to tank an entire political party in the US. UKIP, I believe that was. And Jeremy from the Quartering is a disgrace of a human being who beat in his basement, and as well as like being a massive bigoted jerk. So they'll probably tank themselves before I tank them. I don't know. I don't like to speculate about things. I'll just continue to do what I do, and if they take themselves, well, I don't give a damn.
And to kind of circle back to what was mentioned earlier, which was this idea of a lot of choices and nuances in games, particularly in the themes of the games. Um, what are like some of the ways that you think games could do a better job of presenting the politics they're trying to interact with, the themes, the perspectives, the characters, and how that really reflects on who we are collectively as people?
I'm not a huge. I'm just gonna come straight out. I'm not a political scientist in any way, shape, or form. I'm just a guy who had high school education, and a lot of my feelings about politics are my own opinions.
Mm.
So before I answer this question, I just wanted to get that disclaimer out before anyone comes to me saying that I'm some kind of naive idiot. I know I'm a naive idiot.
If anybody wants to direct their anger at a political scientist, direct it at me because I went for the degree and I publicly write what I think. So,
But anyway, regarding that question, I think a lot of some games that are like RPGs are kind of okay. A lot of like Fallout 4, though, I think that game has terrible writing with the Institute, especially with how the main leader of that just kind of calls you an idiot and just goes on, oh, you wouldn't be able to understand what we're doing here, and yada yada. I think that's terrible writing from like, especially compared to like one of the previous games, Fallout New Vegas, where Caesar is very articulate with his goals and everything, as well as like Fallout 1, with the Master being very well spoken about their motivations, especially with the whole Unity thing. And this is just information I know. I've played Fallout New Vegas, and I know like Caesar and everything he's about. I only know the information about the Master because of a review about his whole thing. But a lot of games are really good on the political aspect. Some of them are very bad. They're very simplified. As far as I could tell, anyway. I'm not a massive expert. I don't play a lot of. Well, I have a lot of video games. I just don't play a lot of video games because there's just so many games to play, so little time. If you get it.
I feel the same way with books. I have way too many books, not enough time.
Speaking of books, I read a lot of. I read more books than I play video games, honestly.
Oh, is that like that's interesting. So what like genre of books do you like enjoy? Like
I used to. I enjoy alternate history,
ooh.
also science fiction and fantasy. Those are my three main genres, anyway.
See, since it's anybody who has watched my channel probably already knows, I'm probably big in political stuff and history. But I am particularly fond of reading comparative narratives of history. So, for example, currently I'm reading a book that goes over the distinctions between John Brown's development as a political figure and his opposition to slavery compared to Abraham Lincoln's. And it's an interesting comparison because it's a very much a grassroots revolutionary perspective versus an institutionalist who lived a little longer. But I was wondering how have like your readings and how you've kind of interacted with literature impacted your content creation now that you mention it.
Pretty difficult question, actually, because I enjoy. I think it's because of my love of literature that I enjoy the games I play. Because I read when I was growing up. I read Captain Underpants. I read that other series by that same writer, Ricky and the Giant Robot. I think that was the same. And as well as like Brian Jacques and Isaac Asimov and lots of other sci-fi and fantasy writers. Especially my love of D&D came from Richard A. Slavator. I was sometimes it's really hard to remember people's names, especially when it's non-English standards on occasion. Even regular English names are hard for me sometimes because I'm terrible with names.
Oh, trust me, I'm terrible at names too. I just sometimes if I want to remember a book, I'll just go to like whatever paper I wrote about the book and look at the citation, and that's how I remember it. Probably the most nerdy thing I've ever said, but it's something that I've always struggled with.
Oh, but to directly answer your question, the way that my content is done by interest screen for my streams, for the most part, has a symbol of the Wheel of Time on it, as well as like the original Fallout symbol, and then and then Dragonborn symbol. Well, the original dragonborn symbol within the game's lore
Mm.
for like the blades. So I would say that a large amount of fantasy, actually, especially fantasy, as well as like a lot of science fiction, helped with my appreciation for games, as well as like the politics within them. I would say that. I can't really get into specifics because I'm not really good at voicing my thoughts, honestly. So
It's all right. I mean, I sometimes have a thought in terms of how I read something, and then I'm like, this makes sense the way I word it, and then it comes out and it's like, nope, that made absolutely no sense. But to kind of get to, since we're wrapping up in a bit, I just wanted to ask, like, considering your channel's wide variety of content and what you've been working on thus far, where do you expect to go in the future with your content, with your YouTube and Twitch? And what other content are you planning to do in the future if anybody wants to check your stuff out?
um, I would say that that would like to expand. Well, currently, well, first of all, I do plan on doing more Omori. If you guys, if y'all don't know, Omori is a game centered around like depression as well as like other dark themes. I do hope on doing expanding out on a little bit more than I'm currently on because I'm playing Divinity Original Sin Enhanced Edition with previously mentioned Celery Live as well as like Enderall, which is a total conversion mod for Skyrim, which has pretty dark themes, but as I have a lot of darkness in my life, unfortunately, that's doesn't phase me all that much. I don't want to go into that at the moment. I don't want to make people depressed, especially, and I don't want to say, "Oh, my life is so hard. Pity me." Nah, it's not. I don't want to do that. And I do hope that a lot of people come on by. I do want to become a partner on Twitch. I don't. As I said, I'm not doing Twitch or YouTube for money. I do hope that people do enjoy my content. And if I do more political stuff on my channel, hopefully people enjoy that.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you on, and I really hope that your content takes off even more. And I hope to learn from your streaming schedule because mine is non-existent. But
Well, for the most part, I do try to do Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, sometimes Sundays, at at around 6. Oh, I also occasionally stream D&D sometimes. So if you all have an interest in that, please come on by.
all right. So this is Zalrok. You can find him at twitch.tv/Zalrok_chaos. Thanks again for joining me. I really appreciate it. And we will see you again sometime, hopefully on the channel soon.
Take care and cheers, everyone.